Hello, I'm Julie Swenson, Managing Director of Forward Theater Company in Madison, Wisconsin.
And I'm Mike Fisher, Milwaukee-based theater writer and dramaturg.
And I'm Jen Uphoff-Gray, founder and artistic director of Forward Theater Company, and this is Theater Forward, a monthly conversation about theater from a local, regional, and national perspective. From Madison to Manhattan, we're excited to share insights into our own company while exploring issues surrounding theater in the Midwest and around the country. Welcome to episode 109 of Theater Forward.
Good to be here. Yay!
Yes. This month, we are thrilled to bring back one of our favorite topics, the plays that stay. And we are going to be hearing from four amazing theater artists about productions that they saw or maybe worked on that have really stuck with them over the years, and maybe learn why those plays have continued to resonate for them. So I cannot wait to be surprised by what we are going to hear in the coming minutes. So up first is Cody Estell. Cody is the artistic director of Next Act Theater in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, a position he's been in since December of 2022. And prior to that, Cody was artistic director of Raven Theater in Chicago. And I have to say personally that I have just really loved having Cody as a new member of Wisconsin's theater ecosystem. He has been a terrific colleague, and I'm looking forward to getting up to all kinds of shenanigans together in the future. But for now, welcome, Cody, and tell us about your play that stays.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. When you sent me this request to talk about a play that that has resonated with me, my first and immediate thought was uh, David Cromer's production of A Streetcar Named Desire at Writers Theater in 2010. That production, it will always stick with me. But it was this living, breathing organism that just literally came to life as soon as you walked into that theater. You could feel the heat, the New Orleans heat, as soon as you entered that theater. And the space, I don't know that they had done this before or not, but it's the only time I had seen the theater. This is their previous theater that no longer exists, but it was the audience sat in the round, and the house was center, and you could see through the walls of this house. And when when the play started, it was just like a ball being launched out of a cannon. It was just ruthless, unapologetic, um, theatrical, and all of the actors in that play were terrific. But one of the things that I didn't know at the time that made more sense later was that Stella and Stanley, the two people playing those roles, were together in life, but I didn't know that when I was watching it. And oh my goodness, I mean um, the tension and uh, sex appeal was just thick. And David did this really brilliant thing where every transition, it never stopped. The play just kept going. They lived through every single one of those transitions. And, down to watching in one of the transitions, I'll never forget it. I mean, Stanley and Stella having, you know, um, pretty amazing intercourse right there on stage, and just we all watched it, and it was so real that it was like, wait a minute, are they actually, what is happening? um, but it was an incredible production where also the design team had come the whole production had come together in a way that maybe up until that point I hadn't really seen something gel so well together, um, that that stuck with me. Yeah, I actually went back to see it a second time because I was just so enthralled with what I was watching. Um, and it was exciting too because David had taught at Columbia where I went to school, and um, one of um, one of uh, my peers, Andrew Swanson, was also cast in it. So it was also just like this brilliant production, but also like having a personal connection to it that was like, I know him, and I know him. Um, that was exciting as well. But yeah, that's what immediately came to mind. This hot and steamy production of Streetcar Named Desire.
What an excellent choice.
Yeah, Cody, I got to cover that back in my old days. I as a critic up here, and all I had to do with my editor, who is not a theater guy per se, but is definitely an ally. So there's this guy named David Cromer, and he works Marvels no matter where he goes, no matter what he does. And oh, by the way, Writers Theater is closer to downtown Milwaukee than even Madison is. So if you're letting me cover places like Forward Theater, which I was just starting to cover, then you need to be letting me cover this production. And for those of you who don't know, this theater Cody's talking about, it's a postage stamp sized space. So you were, no matter where you were sitting in that space, you were right on top of it. And it added to that sense of claustrophobia that I think you've already described so well. It sticks out for me too. If all the streetcars I've seen, it's just super special.
Yeah, yeah. And at the time I was living downtown Chicago, and I think it might have been the first time that I had gone to Writers. And living in Chicago, I didn't have a car. Well, not at that time. Eventually I did, but at that time I was just a poor college student. But I remember getting on the train from Union Station to go all the way up to Glencoe, and getting off this train in this quaint little village, and like, where am I? And that there was this just like magical theater happening there. But yeah.
I'm curious. I'm always especially curious when we have other directors on to do these conversations. Do you feel like that was influential at all in your own development as a director? That particular production?
Yeah, me talking about the transitions. I'm a stickler to making sure that things are continuing, that the story doesn't stop. It bugs me when a director just pulls a blackout just because. I think that there has to be a real reason for a blackout. Otherwise, the story keeps going, and you know, making sure that the story doesn't stop. Otherwise, I feel like, and it bugs me when I see a play and a director doesn't tell a story through a transition, because it's like, oh, you're putting me on hold. Um, you want me to
Right.
just sit here and wait? Um,
You're speaking my language, friend.
I, I find it lazy.
Yeah.
But maybe that is some what some things that I learned in college of what to do and what not to do.
Yeah. What a great production to describe.
Yeah.
I did not get to see that one. Do you remember who those actors were? Your Stella and your Stanley and Blanche?
I do. Matt Hawkins was Stanley, and Stacey Stoltz was Stella, and Natasha Lowe was Blanche.
Beautiful.
Mhm.
Well, and the great thing about that Blanche was, so often you get Blanches that are played as neurasthenic ninnies, which is totally unfair and untrue to what Williams wrote. It leaches out any of the tension in the relationship between her and Stanley, the sexual tension that has to exist in that relationship, and it gives Blanche a pass on some of the less seemly elements of her character. So it takes a genuinely two-dimension character reflecting William's own conflicts and makes it one-dimensional. And we so did not get that version of Blanche in this production, and that really stood out for me too as something that made me challenged my thinking and made me think hard in ways that were uncomfortable about the relationship between the two of them, about the rape that takes place. It was rich and complicated in ways that it needs to be to sort of capture, I think, what Williams was trying to do in his own conflicts.
And then one of the things that was hard about being in Chicago during that time was then there would be these plays that I would want to do and direct, and then it'd be like, well, David Cromer already directed that show. Oh well, well, what am I going to do? But
Right.
I
Yeah.
remember coming across a Williams play called Vieux Carré, and it had not been done in any recent production, and it was like my first sort of breakout show that got really good reviews and extended, and sort of made producers start wanting to hire me. But it was like, how can I direct a Williams that hasn't been done, and I don't have to be compared to the great David Cromer.
Mm.
Yeah, we could do a whole podcast on the work of David Cromer.
Right.
Yeah, he has done some really unbelievable things.
Well, we could do a dozen podcasts on the work of Tennessee Williams, and I'm taking what you've said, Cody, as a down payment on some future production in some capacity by our greatest American playwright in your space. So
Yeah.
just throwing that down.
Yeah.
Noted.
Perfect. Cody, thank you for joining us. Thank you for sharing that wonderful play that has stuck with you. That was a perfect example of the form.
Milwaukee based actor James Carrington has acted all over Wisconsin in productions from Cheeseheads the Musical up north to the Hot Mikado at Skylight Music Theater. Most importantly, of course, he played Golden Thunder in the forward production of Airness, which goes down as one of the great iconic rock and roll moments in the history of the state of Wisconsin. He's also now the Associate Director of Engagement with the Milwaukee Repertory Theater. James, welcome so much to Theater Forward.
Thank you. I just need Mike to introduce me every day, everywhere, every hour. That's the way to start life. So thank you. Hi, everybody. Hello, listeners. How are you? So before we start with the play that stays, as I was telling Jen and everyone earlier, this filled me with anxiety because there were about 18 shows that stayed with me. That is hyperbole, but it's, I think as artists, as actors, whatever, storytellers, we're struck by a lot of different things in plays, musicals, productions, and even the ones that aren't great kind of stick with you because you've learned something or you experienced something. And even the ones that are good, you've enjoyed a performance and that kind of just nestles deep inside you. So trying to parse out the ones that kind of glued themselves to your soul was a challenge, but it was a great challenge. So I'm kind of going to cheat and I'm going to give you 3, but the 2 are honorable mentions. The 2 are honorable mentions, everyone. We're not going to be here for too long. So in second grade, I went to a private Christian school from kindergarten through senior year. And the arts were like a fun little addition, which was so ridiculous. But anyways, in second grade, there was a traveling theater production of The Hobbit that came to our school. And I was on my little carpet square, and I just remember seeing the Smaug puppet come out, and I just wanted to touch it. I wanted to look at it. I wanted to see how it worked. And I saw the feet underneath the puppet, and I said, "Who is that? Who's in the puppet?" So that kind of stuck with me in second grade, saying, "What is that?" And now in 2024. I'm sure it was duct tape and glued together, and those actors were hot and tired and, I'm doing children's theater, but they left an impact on me. I still think about it to this day. My second honorable mention is Aida on Broadway. I was in 7th grade, and it was the first time I had seen so many Black people on a professional stage. And again, I was in 7th grade. I didn't really know. I knew I liked theater. I knew I wanted to do it. And that was my first Broadway trip, and I just was overwhelmed. But the end of Aida, the end of Act 1 ends with a big, giant gospel song. And I just turned to my mom during intermission, like with tears. And I was like, I don't know what they felt like church. I say it felt like church, which I grew up in the church. So just seeing those people, hearing those voices, it felt like community and family. And so that has stuck with me. And then the number one is, I also hate this because none of them are like Milwaukee or Madison based, which makes me feel like a bad person. But I'm just going to say that, disclaimer, everybody. I'm just going to say that I feel bad that it's not on Milwaukee Madison shows, but I love everybody. I was a freshman in high school. I was going into my freshman year of high school. And my drama teacher was a huge, just classical Shakespeare. He loved that. And every summer he went to the Stratford Festival in Canada. And he proposed to all of his drama classes to go on a trip with him. And he proposed it to the school and the principal, and they said, okay, you'll have to fund it. They'll have to help pay for it. And if they all agree, if you get at least, I think it was 8 people, the trip could go. And they got 13 of us. And I begged my parents, and they did not. And my parents have always been supportive, but they're just not theater people. So they were like, oh, okay, Canada, sure. Shakespeare, sure. But they agreed. And it wasn't cheap, but bless them, they agreed. So we saw, we saw 6 shows. And the first day was the first night. We got in, we drove in, and the first night was Richard III. And it was, it sounds so ridiculous, but it was a religious experience. Richard was played by Tom McCamus. I had to look this up. Tom McCamus, McCamus, I think is his name. And of course, like a big Canadian actor, because that's what they do. It's all these famous Canadian who do films and TV shows up there. And he came out, with his back, and I just leaned forward and just was like dialed in for almost 3 hours. And it was so incredible. And also he was incredible. The women, Anne and Margaret, were incredible. But what else was so stunning? I saw the spectacle of theater and what that could be. And they had this giant throne that also like would break apart and become a mirror. And I just was like, what is that? And the battle at the end, where he's getting cursed by all these ghosts, were all of a sudden 2 projectors flew up from tents. They looked like tents, but they were projectors. And they flew out of the tents, and actors were being filmed from backstage and being on the projector. And their faces were like contorted and twisted. And there was a wind machine, and people were getting blown off the stage. And I thought it was the coolest thing in the world. I had never seen something like that. I couldn't get over it. And the show ended, and I went to my drama teacher and I said, Is every show like that? Is every play like that? Are we going to do plays like that at school? And he was like, well, no. But he was like, yeah, this is, they have the budget, and they have the tech directors to think of the designers to think of this stuff. And this can be theater, but also theater can be small and intimate. And I said, I don't know. I want to do theater that's big and grand and huge. And I want to be Richard III, and I want to be Anne, and I want to be Margaret, and I want to be Edward, and all these things. And I had maybe read Romeo and Juliet. I think that's all I had read, and a bit of Hamlet. But I said, I want to be the villain, and I want to be mean, and I want to be thrown around on a stage, and just, that to this day just like sticks with me. It was so incredible. And I'm always trying to get back to that feeling of as a performer and as a audience member, of just my jaw being dropped and my face going slack and wanting to get back to that feeling of I'm never going to see something like this again. And I've seen beautiful productions. We all have. So, but yeah, man, it was called Richard III: Reign of Terror, which was, it was so ridiculous. Like looking back, I'm like, what a ridiculous title. Reign of Terror? What? But yeah. So those are the three, but Richard III is number one, like buried in the psyche of James Carrington as, wow, theater can be incredible and audacious and scary. That's it.
Yeah.
Oh,
James
beautiful.
Carrington, you make me wish that this could be a 4-hour podcast because I want the other 15 that were on your list to hear about them. I had to write down what you said, the plays that glued themselves to your soul. How beautifully you put that.
You know,
oh my gosh.
Anthony Ciamolino, who's the artistic director at Stratford, says, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. What happens at Stratford stays with you forever. I mean, I've been telling people for years in print, I used to cover it for the Journal Sentinel every year, the Stratford Festival. People, it's only a 10-hour drive. It's not that far away. And you will have experiences like the one James is talking about. I mean, it's just an amazing place to go for theater.
Yeah, the whole trip was incredible. And then we got a backstage tour and just seeing all those beautiful costumes. And
oh, did you go to the costume shop?
Yes. And
isn't that great?
Oh my gosh, the cloaks and the robes and the jewelry. I just, again, a little Black boy from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I was like, I just don't understand how it happens. I don't know where it comes from. But I want to do it and I want to be in it and I want to wear that thing and I want to say those words. And yeah, it was, every show that we saw was beautiful and cool and special and different. And then, like, not to talk too much about other shows, but we saw Oswald at Innswell, and that was super, super intimate. And it was in a different space. It was like an intimate, small black box feel. So I was like, oh, it can be intimate. It can be small and it still can be awesome. Yeah.
You know, the stories you told about your elementary school and middle school and high school experiences just for me really underline how transformative it is when we get young people these theater experiences and how increasingly rare it is. And having worked with you as an artist here in Wisconsin and being so grateful for the artist you've grown into, it makes me really, really glad that you at least got to have those formative experiences. And how can we continue to make sure
Absolutely.
more young people have them?
Yeah, they just need the feeling and the invitation to be there,
right?
Or it to be taken to them.
Well, and Stratford in particular also, touches on another thing that you've touched on, James, which is this is a place which way before it became the sort of fashionable, politically correct thing to do in the United States, was casting tons of global majority actors, including in Shakespeare plays, when that just wasn't being done. Wasn't even being done really in Britain to the degree that it was being done in Canada, which reflects the multiracial nature of Canadian society, but also reflects the sort of very progressive values, I think, of some of the artistic directors they've had. And frankly, they continue to show us the way in terms of, how we can have a theater which is not only great, but part of what makes it great is making it more inclusive. So that, like last summer, you have a Black man playing Richard II. And was terrific. And I mean, it was just a mind-blowing production in all kinds of ways, but it goes to the heart of what theater can do when it is truly reaching not only our young people, but all of our people.
Yeah. I love that place. It was something, man. And I've never been back, but I should go back.
Yeah.
Let's go back, James. I'll go with you.
Yes.
Let's all go.
Let's all go. Yeah.
Well, with that inspiration,
Yeah,
James, thank
wonderful.
you. Thank you for sharing those plays that stayed with you. I wouldn't have had you leave
Thank
out
you.
any of
Thank you.
them.
This
That was
was, I
perfect.
just, I love everybody at Ford. I just love talking to you all. And you guys are just really, really cool. So thanks for having me.
Back at you, my friend.
Our next guest and friend who's going to tell us a story is a good friend, Lisa Schlenker. I've known Lisa for, probably more than 20 years when she had a long, long tenure at Skylight Music Theater. She's now the production manager at Northern Sky in Door County, um, props master, scenic designer. We last worked with Lisa on our show, What the Constitution Means to Me, and her gorgeous design of the shoebox diorama. So we are thrilled to have you here, Lisa. And yeah, as soon as you want to just jump in and tell us your story, your play that stays, we're ready to hear it.
All right. Well, thanks so much for having me. One of my earliest formative experiences with theater that I'd like to share involved Shakespeare to start with. I'd seen plays and musicals earlier as a little kid with my parents, stuff like Fiddler on the Roof and Little Abner and Sound of Music and Godspell, that sort of thing. And those were fun and interesting, but not as impactful as a small child. This was my first sort of solo foray into theater. It was a summer night. I'd finished my home chores, and as was customary, I was told, go ride your bike, be home by dark. And that meant like adult dark, like after the street lights were on. And it was a little loose. Times were different then. So I ended up riding my trusty fuchsia colored Schwinn with the sparkly silver banana seat over to the local park amphitheater. And there was a summer stock company called Genesius Guild performing in my hometown of Rock Island, Illinois. Genesius Guild is kind of an interesting company in that since 1956, they've produced classics, and I mean only classics. Shakespeare, Aristophanes, Euripides, that sort of theater. So that night, they happened to be rehearsing A Midsummer Night's Dream, and I was completely captivated. I remember laughing out loud at Bottom and Puck, and I remember being so entranced by the mismatched love stories and the magic of what was going on in Shakespeare's storyline. And I ended up just feeling so reassured that in the end, all was made right and would work out, at least in that particular world. That was very comforting for me. I went back night after night to watch rehearsals. And soon enough, somebody in the company saw a spare set of hands just sitting out there that perhaps could be put to better use. So they invited me backstage to, just hand something off, no big deal. So that was my first stage crew gig. Just like that, I felt instantly welcomed into this kind of weird yet nerdy yet super friendly group of adults who seemed really passionate about Shakespeare and really passionate about putting on shows. The next production was As You Like It, and I immediately volunteered for backstage crew work again, a lot to just get out of the house, but a little because I had this kid-like infatuation with that story too, both Jaques and Celia. It was a little confusing to my 11-year-old self that I was interested in all this, but they seemed to want to allow me to continue. Interestingly, 9 years later, I wound up getting assigned As You Like It as my first solo scene design assignment in college. It was the project on which I learned to weld because I had designed an abstract metal tree for that production's Jaques to center his acting area for that famous monologue. And at my small college at the time, student designers worked in the shop and we built stuff as well. I think without the Genesius Guild in my life as a preteen, I might not be where I am today. So it really at Genesius Guild, and that Summer Night and Midsummer Night's Dream is responsible for me becoming a professional theater designer and a resident designer at a company who puts on shows in an outdoor amphitheater in Door County, Northern Sky. So that's my story.
It's a magical story.
Fantastic. I'll say. Do they still exist?
They
Lisa?
do. They sure do. Yeah, they're still going.
And Lisa, did you work with them all through after that 11-year-old experience? Did you work with them through the rest of your teen years before going to college, or?
Yeah, off and on. I mean, we did like the Birds, and we did a couple tragedies. So I didn't do every show, but I was frequently on the backstage crew with them. Yeah. Yeah, and then in the 70s, they started doing a summer opera program also. And I was fascinated by opera. And so that probably was one of the feeder mechanisms that got me open to that art form, which is, of course, a huge part of my freelance career.
Yeah, it's got to be really cool at a place like Northern Sky in particular, which what is special to me for so many reasons, but one of them is that you have shows that appeal to people on so many different levels, from age 3 to age 90. But to see all those young people in the audience, especially if it's a Shakespeare inflected show, like they do so many of those, there's got to be a part of you that looks out at that and sort of sees your younger self sort of looking up at that stage the way you once did.
That's exactly right. I think it's one of the aspects of Northern Sky that drew me to the full-time resident designer position that I hold with the company. You know, I feel like it's a come full circle in my career.
Yeah.
Oh,
I just love, I mean, it's always one of the highlights for me getting up there. And I love your design work so much. It's like everything with Northern Sky. It reminds you that so-called simple is actually super hard. And that to tell the stories you do through the scenic designs that you do it's amazing. It's clear as can be. And yet there's always, and I used to love puzzling with this as a critic, sort of thinking through the sort of multiple layers behind that really easy first layer into the things that are behind it. And Midsummer's like that too, right? I mean, it's such a simple play that's actually a super complicated psychological study. So
that's right.
Fits.
I have to say, I had great inspiration and great shoes to fill with the, resident designers at Northern Sky who came before. I mean, Jim Moronic is a poet in scene design, and making sure his remounts are worthy of his original design ideas is a part of my responsibilities. And Neen Rock as well. We're remounting her design for Belgians in Heaven. And then I had a responsibility to design the prequel to that, which is a new work, Hell's Belgians, with a sensitivity to that same aesthetic and that same storytelling method that she used. So it's been amazingly enriching for me to rely on the strength of their work as I move forward with my own work here.
It's a wonderful illustration of the way legacy, mentorship, influence goes generation by generation in this field.
For sure. Yeah.
Lisa, thank you for sharing that story with us and for doing it with such a designer's eye. That image of you and your fuchsia bike with the sparkly silver that will stick with me. Yeah, I love it.
Right.
It had horse decals on it as well.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Of course.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you.
My great pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
And for our final play that stays in this episode, we have Michael Burke. Michael is a freelance director whose career around the country has taken off in recent years, which is no surprise to anyone who has ever seen his beautiful work. Michael's based in Chicago, but has recently been directing shows in Colorado, Connecticut, Indiana, Florida, and of course, Wisconsin. And we are thrilled that he'll be returning to Forward this fall for our production of King James, for which I cannot wait. Michael, welcome, and I'm excited to hear what your play that stays.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. Okay, so my play that stays is one that that I have only ever experienced on video. I have not had the chance to see this live because it is Russian, and it is Russian in Russian, and I saw a video without subtitles. But boy, oh boy, did it have a really permeating effect on me. So some of you at this point may have heard of the Russian director Dmitry Krymov. He has recently come to the United States to begin working, given all of the things that are going on in Russia right now. He cannot go back to Russia. His name has been pulled off of works that he did in Russia that he can no longer be connected to. Like it's wild, but he's here now. But before that round of chaos happened, when he was working in Russia, he did a piece called Opus Number 7 at his studio, and at that studio, he started that studio as a designer studio where he teaches he teaches design to his students. At the time, that's what he was doing, but he had a firm belief that designers are performance ready and creative in their own right, and so at the studio, he would bring the designers together, and they, as a cohort, would create these incredible pieces of theater, and the designers would perform them, and just sort of mind blowing images. And this piece is one of those. It was created, I believe, it was for the 100th anniversary of Shostakovich's death, I believe. But it was a two-part piece inspired by Shostakovich and the persecution of Russian Jews. And it is one of the neatest, most spectacular pieces of visual storytelling I've just ever had a chance to witness. It's difficult to describe because, again, it was in Russian and there were no subtitles. So I have no idea what anyone's saying or singing, but I will try my best. So the play opens up and the audience is sitting, we're like in something like a gym, and the audience is sitting all together on one side of the room, and opposite the audience is this sort of giant wall made out of what we come to know is like white cardboard. And at the beginning of the story, there is someone who's standing in front of the white cardboard, and they're singing sort of operatically, and then from behind the wall, a knife pokes through the cardboard and it cuts out a little hole, and then all of a sudden you see someone's eyes through the hole from behind the cardboard. They cut out another hole lower down, and their like hand comes out, and you're like, I don't know what this is, but it's really neat. And I wasn't expecting people to come out of the walls, so to speak. And that evolves, and more people come out, and more people are singing, and they're singing at music stands. And then I will try my best to paint the picture of the image that stuck with me so clearly. So this wall of cardboard, these people that have come out and they're singing. At some point, a shift happens, and when they came out to sing, they also brought with them like mop buckets, dirty looking mop buckets, like they're gonna clean something up. A shift happens, and then all of a sudden, all like 8 of these people pick up their mop buckets, rush across the space for this wall, and they just sort of toss the contents of the buckets onto the wall. inside the buckets is black paint, and so they've now like thrown these big splatters of black paint against the wall, and the paint is dripping down the wall, and then these big, just messy, giant splashes of paint. And you're like, okay, that's interesting. And then they're taking a second to like clean up some of the excess paint, but mostly it's just paint dripping down the wall. And then one of them takes out this little piece of black fabric or something, and a staple gun, and starts stapling these pieces of fabric to the giant paint splashes. There's a little band that they staple kind of across the middle of these black splashes, and then there's a little sort of half circle shape that they staple right above the paint splotches. And then all of a sudden, before your eyes, these splashes of paint become Jewish men, because they've got the little yarmulke up here and a little slash, and you know that that's a waist, and you're looking at this image, this sort of abstract image of a person. And then someone else in the group pulls out like a knife, like switchblade, and then everyone pulls out switchblades, and they go and they stab the cardboard wall, and they start cutting out around these splashes and sort of cut out a rough shape of the man that they've been sort of putting together piece by piece. And they cut out these men, and so and we get that far, and then they put on gloves to really start cleaning up the mess that they've made, and they're all in like neutral colors, whatever, but these gloves are bright red when they go to start to clean up the mess. And there was something really striking about seeing these people red-handed as they were dealing with the mess that they've made in creating the image of these folks. All of that was like just really, really fascinating. And then the magic started happening. So suddenly the lights start to shift, and you hear this sort of sound that's almost moaning, wailing, almost chanting, and the torsos of these men that have been cut out start to like wave and lean forward, because behind the wall, I guess, they had been pre-rigged and they knew exactly where to cut. Who knows? But all of a sudden, these things that you thought were static and inanimate start to animate, and they're moving and they're breathing and they're wailing and they're crying, and there's light coming through them, and and then from off stage somewhere, someone turns on the loudest, most aggressive, like wind turbine fan, and these cutout figures are like literally blown forward, and it is just a monstrous amount of effectively, I guess, confetti that comes through them, through the wall, so covering everyone in the room, and it's so loud, and sort of it's a I'll never forget it, because it's sort of in the wake of it, you realize that what you just witnessed was like the gas chambers, the place that they were sent to be exterminated, and we just sort of experienced that from the inside with these men as an audience, and that is within the first 15 minutes of a nearly 3-hour experience, in which giant 2-story puppets come out. There's a dueling piano battle, like dueling steel grand pianos crashing into each other like bumper cars. Just some of the most magical imagery I've ever witnessed, and it sort of so I sort of I have a sense of what this piece means in terms of what it felt like and how it impacted me. One day I hope to see it live with subtitles to know what any of them are saying. But it was just really, really moving and a sort of a marker for like the only limit is your imagination. And if you can imagine something up as dreamy as that, people will go on the ride. It's just so inspiring. So that's, I don't know, that's not exactly the story of the play, but it is the story of how it worked its way into my guts.
Michael, I love that so much. I mean, sometimes it's really fun with these stories to have someone bring up a production that I know about, maybe even saw something legendary, but it's even more fun when it's something that I don't really know anything about, because it makes me want to go find it. I'm really curious what brought it to you. You know, what were the circumstances under which you got to see this recording?
And where can we find it?
Yeah, absolutely. Right.
Yeah.
I can't recall exactly how it came into my life. I know in undergrad, we had a directing class, and our professor at the time had brought Karimov's work into our sphere. But this was a couple, 2 or 3 years after that I encountered this. I want to say that I was working on another show and just happened to stumble on another piece of his called Donkey Hot, which is a bastardization of the name Don Quixote. And it's a piece of that I believe is sort of about, mental health. But a video clip of that that also sort of inspired me was this really nice, exciting, ridiculous shadow puppet show. But you know how in a lot of shadow plays you see the light remain static and the puppets move? In this one, they moved the light as well. And it was like all of a sudden you had close-ups and wide shots and roving shots because they're moving the source around. And it was just like, that's so neat. And I believe I stumbled across that somehow, probably because I was looking for research on shadow play, because I was doing one in the production of The Pillow Man that we were doing. And I think it was from there that I sort of found this clip, and then that led me to this other clip, or this other it was not a clip, it was the full production on YouTube. That video no longer exists, that I know for sure. But I do believe it is still possible to see it somewhere in the world. But yeah, I think I really just like stumbled on it. And then I wish I was exaggerating. I think I spent the next like 6 months proselytizing about this piece and trying to get all of my theater friends and even some of my non-theater friends to like, look at this, it's so cool. And they're all looking at me like I'm crazy, but
Michael, this may feel like a complete stretch, so just tell me if it is. But I'm still, one of the plays that has stayed with me is the extraordinary production that you directed, which cleaned up at the Jeff Awards recently, of Tambo and Bones, the Dave Harris sort of subversion of Black performance art and deconstruction of a whole lot of things about the meaning of being Black in a world of whiteness. But I'm listening to you talk about this piece, and I think about the unbelievable, even for you, and as I said to you recently, I've seen most of your work in Chicago. I felt like this was just blew my mind in ways that were similarly sort of chafing against the limits of what theater can normally do. Is there any way in which, even on some very, very attenuated tangential level, the piece you've just described informed that work? I sure want to think so anyway.
I mean, I would say 100%. First off, I'm thrilled that you got a chance to see that show. That was, it was a really exciting, wild ride, that one, I think. But no, I would say it definitely influenced that work. If for no other reason, simply because that is the piece that I always come back to when I'm looking at something and I'm thinking, that's impossible. No way to do that on stage. I will always come back to that piece and go, actually, though, you can do whatever you want. And you can figure out a way to do it. But I think, there was and that piece really taught me to, and it's not the only piece that has taught me this, but it was a really great example of the power of surprise and how important it is to set things up in a way that the things that have to happen can be surprising. And in that play, in Tambo and Bones, it was really, really, really important to me that there is absolutely no way we can expect where we're going to head, because it moves through sort of three different universes of story and storytelling. And, but I was like, the success of this is going to lie in having no clue whatsoever that next thing is even remotely possible inside of how we tell the story and how we do it. And there was a sort of a lineage there, I suppose, and thinking about, how we transform space and how we break our understanding of the world and how it operates and treat the thing. So it definitely would say there were influences there, even if they were not overt.
Right. Yeah.
Well, as a director myself, there's nothing I love more than learning about that, as you describe it, that lineage of your influences and how that then manifests in your own work. And that's kind of the point of these Plays That Stay conversations, is to talk to so many amazing artists and learn a little bit about the lineage of their own artistry. So Michael, thank you for sharing such a beautiful one that we're all going to be rapidly jumping onto Google and seeing what we can find of this production for sure. So thank you for that. And I do think I will say then that is it for this episode of Theater Forward, a conversation about theater in Wisconsin, the Midwest, and America. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Jen Uphoff-Gray. I'm Julie Swenson.
And I'm Mike Fisher. This podcast and our opportunities to sort of be exposed to all this great art, thanks to people like Michael Burke, is made possible by our amazing Scott Hayden. You can find our podcast wherever you go for your podcasts, at Theater Forward or at Facebook. Theater, as always, spelled with an ER.
And don't forget to leave us a comment. We'd love to hear from you.
We're so grateful to have you listening, and we will be back soon for another Theater Forward conversation.